As of today, there's a lot of resolutions people like to game at, and it seems that there's no right answer as to which is the best. Even going back 10 or more years, 720p for example was considered HD, and 1080p was the end-all be-all, albeit we're talking back in 2008. But jumping into today's standards, we've got 1080p as almost the starting point, 1440p as the midpoint, and 4K is what seems to be the new pinnacle, assuming we're not talking about any sort of 8K gaming, but we'll be saving that for another day. But when it does come down to gaming, usually people push for the higher resolutions at higher refresh rates. People build out their entire rigs just to reach that upper echelon of 4K high refresh gaming. So with all the latest hardware I've had my hands on, like the new 4K 240Hz OLEDs, why am I constantly performing worse on the new top tier displays compared to the 1440p OLEDs that have already been out? Well, I took a dive into this a little bit more to understand it a bit better, but it sort of starts with esports and competitive gamers. So naturally I wanted to go back and try a 27-inch display at 1440p. Now my friends over at KTC sent me out their 1440p 240Hz OLED to see if this is all smoke or if the pros really are onto something playing at 1440p instead of 4K. I'm also going to be reviewing this monitor from the perspective of a gamer, as somebody who likes to play casually, as well as somebody who's previously peaked top 500 in Overwatch competitively. And of course, sure, swapping from 4K will have its cons, but I'm hoping a 1440p 27-inch display is all I really need to get back into the swing of things. So back to the original question, why am I going back to 1440p, and why do the professionals play at 1440p as well? Well, it comes down to a couple things which I'm going to get into, but when you take a look at the big picture, a monitor for a professional player is not quite the same for them as it is for us. When we're gaming, for example, chances are most of us are just looking for a couple things. Maybe a high refresh rate, does the display look good, perhaps it has some unique features. While that sounds great for us, when it comes down to the competitive player, there's a couple things here that they need, and that thing is a tool for a job. What they're looking for is display clarity, high refresh rate, zero ghosting, and something that simply works. And well, in this situation, we've got a 240Hz on a 27-inch 1440p display, which gives us a PPI of about 108, so we know it's pretty sharp. So in this case, not only is this still an incredibly crisp image on an OLED panel, the 27-inch screen size is typically better for reactionary reasons while in competitive games. While gaming, where I typically have to dart my eyes around a bit more across a larger screen like a 32-inch, 27 inches is just about the sweet spot. And similarly to this is also why some pros choose to play at 1080p on a 24-inch display. And when it comes down to a performance standpoint, pushing out 1440p the way technology is progressing with all these CPUs and GPUs, 1440p is becoming light work compared to 4K. With that, you will be having less dropped frames, any sort of screen tearing, or just general graphical issues. And well, in my situation, while I'm definitely no professional esports gamer, I still need a tool for the job, that being the KTC GP27. And as you might have guessed, this is a 1440p 27-inch OLED display. This one particularly though is spec'd heavily with just about every single thing you would need alongside that 240Hz refresh rate, 0.3 millisecond response time, HDR support, as well as the much needed AMD FreeSync or G-Sync. In the box though, you do have everything as well you might need right off the bat. The monitor itself, a DisplayPort cable, HDMI, USB upstream alongside a Type-C display cable, as well as the stand, which is a screw and click. When it comes down to the ports here, it is pretty packed with a headphone jack, two HDMI 2.0s, a DisplayPort 1.4, a Type-C port with 65 watts power delivery, and two USB-As with upstream to your PC. Of course, in my setup at least, I will be connecting this to my PC rig, as well as my PlayStation 5, and either my MacBook on the KVM, which I'll also be using to charge my peripherals. I started veering away from using my keyboards wirelessly when it comes down to competitive gaming, so I will be plugging direct to the USB hub, although my mouse will still be using a 2.4 GHz dongle. In terms of the build and design here, despite being a budget OLED, this monitor is exactly how I prefer my tech, which is minimal on the front end that doesn't really scream gamer. The back end does level it up just a little bit with some built-in RGB. From an adjustability standpoint, this is a near perfect stand which does let you dial in your competitive setup for height, tilt, pivot, and even rotation. But now that you know what I'm working with, I do want to talk about gaming, particularly PC gaming, since that's the whole reason I'm jumping back to 1440p in the first place. And jumping into competitive gaming, like a dummy, I didn't quit while I was ahead, and instead I ended up tanking my competitive rank without really finding out what the issue was in the first place. But in terms of what I'm working with for my PC, I do have a pre-built from Alienware, which is rocking an i9 and an RTX 4090. In a game like Overwatch, it's easy to push out an absolute cap 240Hz at 1440p. And jumping back into my first couple games at 1440p, I sort of remember why the pros aren't pumping 4K. I'm not really sure if it's a placebo or not, but I straight up popped off relentlessly, and there's something so good about an unwavering smoothness while gaming with zero dropped frames. Not to mention this is an OLED display, which I know a lot of esports pros are going towards because of the 0.03 millisecond response response time, as well as the practically non-existent motion blurring. I can't say I'm an anime protagonist or anything, so it's not like that's really perceptible to me, but I'm definitely clicking more bodies. Clapping these 12-year-olds in Overwatch is simply everything I need at the end of a long day. After spending a little bit more time gaming, I think I might have also made the connection as to why I sucked so bad on my 4K 32-inch display size. I think it comes down to my mouse DPI settings, which scales a little bit different at 1440p, which is what I was typically used to before. So whether or not that's the monitor or some muscle memory, I can't complain. Apart from competitive gaming though, I'm still a sucker for my RPGs like Diablo 4 and Baldur's Gate 3. I'm super pumped for Diablo 4 Season 4, which looks to be a great overhaul for all the gaming systems. For myself, like I mentioned, with less time to play competitive nowadays, I still find 1440p incredible for non-competitive games, which sort of makes this the sweet spot resolution for both value and resolution. And other high fidelity games like Red Dead Redemption 2 are still simply wild on an OLED display, so this monitor is easily a win for both competitive and casual PC gaming. And even if you don't have a PC, there's a lot of value to be had here, even if you're jumping into console, even for you competitive players. Up until recently, I didn't even have a 40 series GPU to pump out these high refresh rates, and I imagine a lot of other people don't either. So if you are building out a console setup and you want to jump into your first OLED, this is definitely an incredible option. And for myself, unlike Overwatch, I get absolutely clapped by children all day long in Call of Duty, regardless of what I am using. That said, between the PlayStation 5 Series X and this OLED monitor, you're still going to be getting a solid 120 Hz. And for a lot of people who are looking to build out a dope setup, you don't have to jump directly into PC gaming, because an OLED panel like this will still give you a dope experience on PS5 or Xbox. And even asking all of you recently in the YouTube community, it seems a lot of you are on 1440p with a mix between console and PC players. Between PlayStation 5 and Xbox as well, you'll mostly be taking full advantage of the HDR, 1 millisecond response time, and since you are rocking an AMD CPU, you are going to be getting that AMD FreeSync Pro. If you are going to be getting into competitive games on console, similarly to PC, this is an excellent starting point, especially from the price to performance across a lot of OLED monitors. And in terms of all the other features, you've still got a good chunk of stuff here in the menus, as well as other features like the built-in KVM. If you are looking for that added functionality in your desk setup, you can use the built-in KVM through the monitor itself to swap all your peripherals between your Type-C device, whether that be a MacBook, iPad, whatever the case is, and your PC. And since that Type-C port has 65 watt power delivery, apart from your laptop, you can still use this to charge your mouse, keyboard, or any other peripherals that have Type-C. Now naturally, since this is an OLED display, you might have some concerns about burn-in. I can say, having tested a ton of OLEDs, not one of them has had burn-in just yet. Personally, I use all the features in the menus that usually come built in, like pixel scrubbing and pixel shift, which is built in on this monitor as well. As for the built-in speakers on here, this is a dual 5-watt setup. Sure, you probably won't be using these speakers for competitive gaming, but for everything outside of that, these get plenty full and sound decent enough for built-in speakers. Shows, movies, productivity, they all work great. Again, OLED panels simply look incredible regardless of what you're doing on it, so all the other stuff outside of gaming is no exception. And without exception, it's easy to say monitors like this really drive a hard bargain compared to the monitors that came out a year ago, which are almost double the price. Sure, this monitor definitely isn't perfect, but for me, the thing I dig the most is definitely the high refresh rate and low response times. In some way, somehow, I game better on a 27-inch 1440p display versus 4K at 32 inches. I'm definitely going to test that a little bit more, but for myself at least, whenever the time allows, I will be pushing my rank in Overwatch back to Grandmasters if I can ever stop being bad. If you do have any questions about this or competitive gaming in general, again, I'm no professional, but be sure to leave them down below in the comment section. I appreciate you watching till the end. Till next time.